with breaking news from the Supreme Court, hitting pause for now on a ruling that would have blocked how people can get access to a key abortion pill. It means right now that pill is still as available as it ever was, but there's a big question mark around the next steps. We'll explain. Then we'll take you to Boston with the suspected leaker of tons of classified documents showing up in court for the first time. So how did he get all that stuff in the first place, and why did it take the FBI weeks to track him down? Plus, the frankly horrifying video of a man not convicted of any crime who died after weeks in solitary confinement before his trial even started. What lawyers for Joshua McLemore's family are telling our team today about their calls for accountability. Plus, how racist and homophobic text messages sent among more than a dozen police officers could mean possibly hundreds of overturned convictions in Northern California. And check out this up-close picture of a black hole you're about to see. The clearest photo ever of one of these things. There it is, but we only got it with the help of AI. So should you believe your eyes here? More on that later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we start with breaking news out of the Supreme Court, with justices now officially considering what to do next in the fight over a key abortion pill. Here's the deal. In just the last 90 minutes or so, we're seeing the court basically press pause on a ruling out of Texas that would have made it harder to get this pill, would have banned it from being sent through the mail starting tomorrow. But tonight, Justice Samuel Alito is out with this new order, you see it right here, that says the lower court's ruling is on hold until midnight Wednesday. Why? Well, that'll give the justices more time to try to figure out where this whole thing goes. So at least for now, women can still get this abortion pill by mail as the legal fight unfolds. I want to get right to Morgan Chesky, who's live for us in Dallas. Biggest questions on this, Morgan, right, is like, what does this mean for people and what comes next? Help us answer it.
Yeah, Hallie, I think what it means is that at least for right now and for the short-term future, there are not going to be any significant changes. But a lot of people are looking forward to that deadline that you mentioned, Wednesday, April 19th. That is how long the Supreme Court has essentially put this on pause for. We do know that mifepristone is still available by mail here. But essentially, this pause is giving the Supreme Court justices more time to dig deep into this issue and try to figure out where each one of them stand before coming out and making a ruling here. Important to note that Justice Alito has requested a response from the plaintiffs who originally filed this suit in Texas. That would have been in the district court in Amarillo, where Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk listened to this case and then ruled a short time ago. Of course, important to note that critics of this lawsuit, Hallie, said that the plaintiffs who filed this case did it intentionally in this court because Matthew Kacsmaryk is known to be a conservative-leaning judge, whereas if they were to have filed this in the Dallas district, it could have been assigned to one of several judges and not a single judge in this district. But again, a lot of people going to be looking forward to Wednesday, April 19th, and seeing where the Supreme Court goes from there.
Yeah, the judges will have a series of options, right? And depending what the justices, I should say, and depending what they decide to do will have a huge impact. Practically, though, Morgan, I think we can't emphasize it enough. I want to be clear. What this means right now, right, is that mifepristone is exactly as available as it has been in recent years, correct? No changes as far as the practical impact for women.
Yeah, you are exactly right here. There's so much up in the air right now. It's tough to understand what exactly is playing out in the status quo, but mifepristone is still available. We know that it's part of that typical two-drug cocktail, or two-drug combination, rather, that is used for the procedure. And it's still widely available by mail, although there are already exceptions to that, Hallie. But as of right now, yes, it's available. Of course, you know, ask me that question in just a few days.
I was going to say,
it'd be a very different answer, though.
Yeah, let's talk again for sure, either Wednesday or Thursday. Morgan Chesky, thank you very much for bringing us that developing news. Other news tonight, we're going to see the suspected leaker of hundreds of classified military documents back in court, also on Wednesday, with a ton of pressure right now on the Biden administration and intel community to figure out how a 21-year-old IT specialist stationed near Cape Cod got access to all these sensitive military secrets. You're about to see here the court sketch our team got of 21-year-old Jack Teixeira in court today when he found out he's going to face 2 federal charges related to having these classified documents after that dramatic arrest we showed you about 24 hours ago. That's it here, right? He was basically perp-walked in those red basketball shorts, that olive green T-shirt in Massachusetts. And at the federal courthouse today, you're seeing his family here walking out. They're linking arms, not answering questions. Our team inside the courtroom says they saw one of the men in his family crying when they locked eyes while Teixeira was in handcuffs. Today's court appearance, however, is not really helping with some of these big questions that we still have. Like, first, how did Teixeira get this access in the first place? Was he granted it? Did he illegally access it using the clearance that he did have? No clear answer from the Pentagon on why a member of the Air National Guard in Massachusetts would need to know about, like, the movement of Ukrainian troops or how our spies are looking at the Kremlin. Second, why exactly did he do it? Was it clout for his buddies on the Discord server? We can't say for sure because we haven't actually heard from Teixeira on that. And then third, with these documents online for weeks, for months, why did it take so long for the FBI to find it? Because based on court documents, it sounds like they maybe only figured it out for sure within the last 24 hours. Ron Allen is joining us now live from Boston. Any better sense of any of these questions, Ron, based on some of the documents, some of the information that we're getting from court?
Well, he had top secret clearance, and he had a higher level of clearance than that as well. This was part of his normal job, and apparently there are many 21-year-olds with a lot of tech and IT experience who the military and other companies, for that matter, employ to do this kind of work. Not steal documents, but they have some expertise in this area. We also learned that the FBI was able to reach out and contact another gamer who was part of this group that was seeing these documents inside a private chat room. He told the FBI that this started back in December and that it kept going for some time. He also, this gamer was able to identify a name associated with Teixeira. There was he identified a driver's license picture of him in a picture lineup, which was the last thing that the FBI needed to arrest him yesterday because they had a positive ID. And Discord, the server, the platform that they were using, apparently also gave the FBI some information that matched his real name, Teixeira's real name, with the name that he was using online. And so putting that all together is how they narrowed down their search and found him.
We'll talk more about that, Ron, because what is so interesting here is that there were media organizations, there were basically online sleuths, journalists who were connecting the dots to Teixeira either simultaneously, perhaps even as faster than the FBI was doing it. Like the New York Times made the idea about 90 minutes after. And you see here, they basically figured it out by looking at, no joke, granite countertops in his kitchen. So they were cross-referencing like a screenshot of the counter that the paper was on and then looking at the pattern of the granite. I mean, it is like intense stuff here. Talk us through more about the identification process and the questions there.
Well, once they had a name, and something of an identity, I believe those pictures were matched with a relative's social media sites, and that's how that part of it came together. But again, I think the key was this other gamer who was an associate of Teixeira, and he had video conferencing calls, for example, with him, and so he knew what he looked like. And this individual gave this information to the FBI, according to the affidavit, at some point along the way. And that's a big part of how they were able to put the pieces together to determine who this individual was. That other gamer who that individual's not charged in any way. He's not implicated in any way. In the documents, he's portrayed as someone who facilitated this and helped the FBI figure it out.
Ron Allen, live for us in Boston. Thank you for that reporting, Ron. Appreciate it. So listen, down south, the flood recovery is getting more complicated for Fort Lauderdale tonight. With the airport able to reopen a couple of runways, but folks there bracing for more bad weather after feet, not inches, but feet of rain led to, well, all this. You see it here. Whole neighborhoods flooded. People in boats, people in kayaks, doing anything to try to stay dry. Florida's no stranger to bad weather, especially during hurricane season, but state officials did not expect something like this to happen in mid-April.
This is a disaster akin to a hurricane strike. And there's still parts of the city that are still flooded and neighbors are still hurting. We're doing our best to make sure that those neighbors are taken care of today and tomorrow.
NBC's Sam Brock is joining us now live from Fort Lauderdale. You are, I think, on a boat. Tell me more.
Yeah, on a boat, not exactly. Right now, I'm on a car, Hallie. Good to see you. It's a pickup truck. It's really the only way that we can maneuver in and out because there's just so much water out there. Yes, we would not do anything but put our safety first, of course. So we're out here right now, and it's interesting because there is expected to be more rainfall later today. The question is, what will that mean for the dynamic right now? Because we've seen the water recede, and it's hard to believe. Look over my shoulder right now. This is one of the deeper areas here. It's about 3 or 4 feet below me. I'm told the high water mark for some of these homes goes above the doorknob. And the more rain that you add, of course, even if it's a marginal amount, could really sort of create a more difficult situation, could aggravate the current status quo. Let me also explain something that I had no idea about until today, which is high tide really factors into this a lot as we pan off and show you what this neighborhood looks like here. High tide, when that's going on, the water that's in the storm system, the drainages and canals and these networks that are all interconnected, cannot escape because the water that goes out into the ocean, those pipes are covered. So you got to wait till tide comes down for them to actually drain this water. That is part of the problem. So they're using these small windows right now, officials, to try to pump out the water with vacuum trucks as well that really suck it all up and they can carry it out. But that's not happening right now. So I spoke with someone who actually was visiting Fort Lauderdale by chance from Ireland and was not expecting anything like this. His child got trapped in a car along with he and his wife, and nearby strangers swooped into the rescue. But he had to talk to his child, his 2-year-old son, while this was all going on. He explained what happened to me earlier today. Your window was closing fast, and you had to make a decision.
I had to make a decision there and then because I could see the current was coming in the water, and the car was starting to move.
So your son, Seamus, was being distracted with Peppa Pig while you were lifting him out of a car window.
Yeah, I had to tell him that. I had to tell him that we're going swimming. He loves swimming.
So, Hallie, it takes a village and a parent's soft touch there, certainly, something you would understand. I would also add, a lot of interest right now in Fort Lauderdale Airport. As of today, right now, there's been about 250 cancellations, roughly 200 delays, which is 450 flights that are affected, either delayed or canceled. It's about 630 total that fly on a daily basis out of Fort Lauderdale. So, yes, it's open again, but the airport is only operating right now really about a third of its capacity.
And question mark on when that's going to get full capacity. Sam, I'm so struck by something you described, which is the idea that because this area is so flat and the water doesn't have anywhere to go, and there may be more water coming now as this storm system moves through, it's almost like a sump pump in your basement, but they're doing it on land, right? I mean, that's kind of the concept here.
It is. It's all interconnected, and here's another dimension to throw at you. It's not just the rain that's coming down. It just so happens that the water table below us is higher because of sea level rise, and also that there's porous rock underneath this part of Florida. So all this water is already really close to the ground, so the water really has nowhere to go. It's underneath, it's above. During hurricanes, you have storm surge as well. They call it the triple whammy. There's nowhere for all this water, Hallie, to escape.
Sam Brock, on the back of I correct myself, a pickup truck, not a boat, with your team there. Sam, thank you so much. We're glad you're showing us that perspective. I appreciate you. Thanks, Sam. Listen, some new details out of San Francisco tonight on the murder of that tech executive, with court documents seeming to show that Bob Lee may have been stabbed to death after an argument about his suspected killer's sister. This is a key potential clue in this question people have been asking. How did Bob Lee and this suspect know each other? Here's the chain of events these documents lay out. That there's a witness who, I'm quoting here, noticed that the victim, Lee, was having a conversation with a woman's older brother, that's defendant Nima Momemi, about the defendant picking up his younger sister from the house where they'd met her. Witness said that the victim, Lee, had to reassure the defendant, Momemi, that nothing inappropriate had happened. According to the court documents, Momeni's sister sent a text to Lee after this argument saying, just wanted to make sure you're doing okay because I know Nima came way down hard on you. The documents say that Momeni then drove Lee to what they describe as a remote location and stabbed him 3 times with a 4-inch kitchen knife. At least one of those stabbings punctured Lee's heart. Momeni is set to be arraigned next week. Prosecutors want him held without bail until then. Mayala Charles is joining us now. And Mayala, again, 24 hours ago, we didn't know the answers to some of these key questions. But as we're coming on the air, we're getting new details on what happened, not just from these court documents, but from the district attorney, right? Walk us through some of this.
Yeah, well, the district attorney is telling us that the stabbing was caught on camera, on a surveillance camera. Take a listen to what she said.
They are seen exiting that tower on surveillance video and leaving together in Mr. Momeni's car. And it is after that, shortly after that, that we see that vehicle stop in a secluded location. And ultimately, we believe that's where the stabbing takes place. And so it's for that reason that we believe he obviously presents a significant public safety risk.
We know that after that police found Lee alone on a sidewalk bleeding and that he later died at a hospital. Momeni is charged with murder with a knife enhancement here, Hallie, and if convicted, he faces 26 years to life in prison.
Tell us more about the connection here between Lee and Momeni, how long they might have known each other. These court documents obviously describe some connection via his sister.
Right. So right now, we don't know how long they knew each other, but the documents do give us some insight into some interactions between the two. So leading up to the stabbing, we know that they spent some time at an apartment together and also a hotel. But the court documents also say at some point there was a FaceTime between Momeni and Lee, although the court document doesn't go on to say when that happened. So, Hallie, that's an important question going forward, is what a possible motive would be here. Why do prosecutors think Momeni was so angry enough to go and stab Bob Lee? Hallie?
Yeah, as they allege. Nyala Charles, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Overseas, some big questions tonight about what might happen overnight in France. Maybe more demonstrations, more protests, after the country's top court said just hours ago that it is constitutional for the president to raise the retirement age there from 62 to 64. That is controversial, to say the least. It already had 1,000 people protesting outside City Hall in Paris tonight. Some people, that sign you see, holding signs that say climate of anger. And that's exactly what we've seen there for months, with basically a nationwide standoff over this plan. French President Emmanuel Macron pushed it through without a vote in Parliament last month. His prime minister saying tonight there was no winner in the decision by the courts today. Ali Arouzi is following the story from Paris for us. It is a big win and a not unexpected one for Emmanuel Macron tonight, but real questions now about what this may spark in Paris and beyond.
That's right, Hallie. Unsurprisingly, Macron got his way. The council agreed with him that this was legal, it was constitutional, and it's a big win for him. But it hasn't done his popularity much good. 19 percentage points down from this time last year, and that's probably going to dwindle even further, given that most of the polls in this country reflect that over 62% of French citizens don't support this reform, and they support the strikes and the protests. But what hasn't happened tonight, Hallie, was a mass riot in Paris, which was anticipated yesterday if this reform was pushed through. We were outside City Hall this afternoon when the vote came through and the decision was made. There were about 1,000 people there. They hung around for maybe an hour after that decision came through, and they fizzled out and went away, which was quite a surprise to most of us here. The police were not involved in any running battles, really, with people here in Paris. In the north of France, in Rennes, there was some violence. A few police stations had been set on fire. A former convent was set on fire. But Paris remained fairly quiet. And the anticipation is that tomorrow may remain fairly quiet as well. There's a sense of uncertainty here. People didn't get their way. They're very upset with what's happened. But there's also possibly a sense of fatigue. 12 days of protesting and strikes. People's lives are on hold. It's taken a toll on them. So whether this will flare up again remains to be seen. It's still a very sensitive subject. People are still very upset about it. But the government seem to have gotten the upper hand for now.
What you described, though, Ali, are both sides really dug in here, right? The government, Macron, obviously moving forward with this retirement plan change. Unions not liking it, no sign they're going to like it. And now they're saying they're not going to meet with Macron. So how does this get resolved?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's such a gulf between the two sides, and they just don't seem to be able to hear each other. Macron was meant to meet with the unions on Tuesday. 8 of the major unions here said, you know what, we don't want to meet him. We have nothing to say to him. They've got their way. We still want to fight for these reforms. So what they're saying now is they're calling for a mass protest on Labor Day on May the 1st. They're asking for all workers, teachers, students, young people to come out and and show how unhappy they are with this reform. But, you know, Hallie, given the fact that in March there were about 1.3 million people out on the streets, now we're talking several 100,000, the momentum seems to be getting less, the tone has been set, and things are going in the direction that Macron wanted.
Ali Arouzi live for us tonight in Paris, just 40 minutes to midnight there. Ali, thank you very much. To an NBC News exclusive tonight, the first look at the Senate's top Republican since he was hospitalized after a fall at a D.C. hotel last month. Our Hill team catching up with Mitch McConnell back at the Capitol. Yes, he was spotted. There he is, but not speaking much, simply telling our Liz Brown-Kaiser he'll be happy to talk more next week when the Senate is back in session. I want to bring in NBC's Sahil Kapoor. So McConnell coming back just in time. We knew he'd be back at work in person on Monday. He really didn't say much to Liz and to our Hill team, just kind of said, hey, we'll talk again. What's the sense from your reporting, from the people close to him, about how he's doing as he comes back now with a lot of business ahead of the Senate?
That's right, Hallie. Well, McConnell will be back as the Senate returns from a 2-week recess on Monday. He is expected to resume all of his duties in leading the Senate Republican Conference. We expect to see him on Tuesday at his weekly Senate Republican leadership presser alongside the rest of his leadership team who had been taking the reins in his absence. In addition, we'll see the return of another familiar face, Senator John Fetterman, who had been away on medical leave. Let's put up a chart about what those two are likely to be coming back to. Fetterman, of course, had been away getting treatment for clinical depression, inpatient treatment. The Senate expects next week to hold an attempt to replace Senator Dianne Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said he will ask the chamber for unanimous consent to do that, to swap her out with another Democrat so they can move through judges while she is away with illness. Not clear how that's going to go over, if Republicans are going to grant that consent. In addition, there will be a briefing on classified documents expected in the middle of next week, likely next Wednesday. There will be a piece of legislation to support fire departments with additional federal grants, and the confirmation hearing of Julie Su, expected on Thursday to be Secretary of Labor. Not clear yet that she has enough support in the Senate. That hearing might give us some hints as to how that's going to go, Hallie.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you very much. Appreciate it. The Justice Department getting aggressive with Mexican cartels today, charging dozens of top members, including, interestingly, the Chapitos, the 4 sons of El Chapo. You know, that notorious, essentially, drug lord, basically. He's now in prison, but his sons are said to be leading their dad's group. You see them there. The Attorney General describing some horrific acts, examples of why the DOJ wants to see the Chapitos captured and punished.
They often torture and kill their victims. They have fed some of their victims, dead and alive, to tigers belonging to the Chapitos.
I mean, that is an incredibly disturbing fact from the Attorney General there. It comes as the Biden administration is also announcing a big deal with the Mexican government to stop drugs from coming up over the southern border and to try to stop U.S.-made guns from going down to Mexico. Why this is all such a big problem? Well, you know it. It's this chart, right? Synthetic opioids like fentanyl playing a role in the deaths of 80,000 Americans in 2021. It is not just numbers. It is the faces of people who have been killed in this crisis. NBC's Julia Ainsley is with us now. So, I can't get feeding to tigers. I mean, like, but it shows the sort of depravity of what we're talking about here when it comes to what these cartels can do and why this is so significant.
Right. You're not just talking about drug dealers. You're talking about a massive criminal organization that can carry out a campaign of fear and violence across an entire country.
But so what can the U.S. Attorney General and can the U.S. government really, with these arrests, make that much of a dent? I mean, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but give us the pragmatic reality check.
Well, I mean, it's a good reality check to have because, yes, they announced 28 charges today, but some of these people are still at large, including 3 out of those 4 Chapitos that you just showed. They want them. Oftentimes, DOJ will name the people they want arrested, but if they're at large, that can be hard. What's really critical here, Hallie, is the cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico. We are basically pleading with Mexico to do more, give us more resources. We'll train you. We'll give you intelligence. We'll do everything we can short of putting handcuffs on these people in your country, but we have to have the cooperation from the Mexican government. That's why we've seen a Mexican delegation come to the U.S., meet with the Biden administration just yesterday, because without that cooperation, we're lost in this fight.
Okay. Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, the family of the man who killed 5 people at a Kentucky bank this week say they're going to have his brain tested. What they're looking for next. Plus, former President Donald Trump split screening with Mike Pence at the NRA convention. We're going to take you there live with a look at what he's saying now. And the reception that the former vice president got might not be what you'd expect. A lobsterman in Maine just reeling in the catch of a lifetime, not in fact a crustacean. We'll tell you what he found coming up in the local. But first, former President Trump, as we speak right now, is speaking at the NRA convention in Indianapolis. In many ways, playing to that audience. Listen.
And I promise you this, with me at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, no one will lay a finger on your firearms, just as took place for 4 years when I was your president. I will uphold those glorious words, shall not be infringed.
Pretty warm reception for him, in contrast to what we heard ahead of Mike Pence's speech, of course, the former vice president under Mr. Trump, when Pence was booed. Listen.
Well, hello, NRA. I love you, too.
So some boos and an I love you, to be clear. Remember, Mr. Pence is set to testify against his former boss in a special counsel investigation looking into Mr. Trump's push to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. Keep in mind the timing of this convention here. It's happening just days after mass shootings in Louisville and Nashville. And even with some of the controversy that the group has faced, its convention still seems to be a must-attend for people looking to get the White House in 2024. Not just Mr. Trump, Mike Pence, but Asa Hutchinson, Governor Kristi Noem, Governor Chris Sununu, all set to speak. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott sending video messages. Vaughn Hilliard is there. He is joining us now live, and I'm looking to see if you are in the room. You are, as the former president is speaking, Vaughn. I know that is always a bit of a juggling act. But walk us through some of the dynamics here, because this is the first time that we have seen Donald Trump and Mike Pence in the same place, albeit not at the exact same time, since word came out about not just Mr. Trump's indictment and arraignment, but, of course, since Mike Pence and his team said he's not going to fight this subpoena to testify against Donald Trump.
Right. It's all quite a backdrop here. And let's be very clear here about why both men are here, is because they're going to be potentially in a 2024 Republican nomination matchup. And the gun rights constituency is a large one. The organizers of this NRA convention suggested that there's anywhere up to 70,000 people here at this convention here over the course of this weekend. And when we're talking about Mike Pence and Donald Trump, I should note that I was just told by one source that the two men did not cross paths. They did not see each other, despite this being the first time that they were at the same event over the course of 2 years. But of course, it's lost on nobody from the press to anybody in this room that the ovation that one received as opposed to the former vice president, Hallie.
Put the convention itself into context, because it's not the first time that the NRA convention has been held in the days after a mass shooting. I think back, in fact, just to last year in Houston, just 3 days after that horrific attack at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. You see other examples there here. And yet, the NRA, while it has had its own share of controversy over its leadership, et cetera, over the course of the last few years, still holds enormous influence.
Right. I mean, I remember back in 2018, it was just 2 months after the Parkland shooting, and there were questions about the NRA convention that year. And it was the very weekend that prom was taking place in Parkland, and yet the then President Trump and Vice President Pence, they came. And their message then in 2018 is very similar to the one that they delivered last year after the Uvalde shooting, and the same one that we are hearing the former president deliver here now, focusing on mental health resources, focusing on security resources inside of schools. And I think it's important. The line that so far I'm going to leave with here today, Hallie, from the former president that he just delivered in a couple moments before coming on air with you was, quote, "Let's be very clear. The issue is not too many guns. The issue is too many thugs, hoodlums, and savage criminals on our streets." I'll repeat that again. The issue is not too many guns. That is coming from the former president and the individual who wants to be the president again.
Somebody else who wants to be the president for the first time is presumably Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican who has not formally thrown his hat into the race, but who is widely expected to. He didn't attend, but he did send a video message. Tell us about that, especially in light of this. I have to bring it up, Vaughn, because it's everywhere in political circles, but in light of this new, quote-unquote, putting fingers attack. Explain that.
So there's a new television ad that is from the Trump-aligned super PAC that's $1.3 million of money that is going into this TV ad. And it's referencing Ron DeSantis eating pudding with 3 fingers. Now, this comes from a Daily Beast article when an anonymous former staffer claims that he watched the Florida governor eat pudding with his 3 fingers. Now, Trump's allies have picked up on this, and this advertisement plays off of that Ron DeSantis should keep his pudding fingers away from senior entitlements, from Social Security to Medicare. It is a line that we are seeing his allies play to. So far, the former president has not used the line specifically himself, yet he's been going on the attack against Ron DeSantis, who is still considering whether to jump into this race or not.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us there in Indianapolis. Vaughn, thank you very much for being there and the alternate golf whisper and normal speaking voice situation. Appreciate you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the family of the man who killed 5 people at a Kentucky bank this week is having his brain tested for CTE. That's that degenerative brain disease caused by perhaps repeated concussions, repeatedly hitting the head. A family friend said the shooter got concussions while playing sports in high school. Number 2, a toxic fire burning for days now at a plastics recycling plant in Indiana is finally under control. But some people who live nearby still cannot get back into their homes. The mayor says they're not even going to consider lifting evacuation orders until a meeting on air and water samples tomorrow afternoon. President Biden wrapping up a tour of Ireland today with a speech where his great-great-great-grandfather grew up. Look at this. Look at that reception for President Biden. That is how excited the town was. They had signs up. They had American flags out, basically a parade route celebrating. We saw President Biden earlier in the day go to Knock Shrine. He met with the priest who gave the last rites to his son, Beau Biden. A very emotional moment for the president there. He is heading home later tonight. Number 4, Twitter's got a new feature for its blue subscribers. It's going to let them tweet up to 10,000 characters because that's what everybody wanted to see. Longer tweets. For everybody with the free version, 280 is your limit. Number 5, Phantom of the Opera, the longest running show on Broadway, is closing this weekend after 35 years and 8,000 performances. So if you're just now thinking of catching it, I'm so sorry to tell you you're out of luck. It is totally sold out unless you have an extra multiple thousands of dollars to shell out to like a reseller. But a moment for Broadway there. Coming up, a new study shows women are making a lot more money, but they're also still doing a lot more around the house. Are you shocked? We're going to take a look at what's behind this. Video newly obtained by NBC News is showing us some horrific images from the final 3 weeks of a man's life, spent in a windowless isolation cell in an Indiana jail. It's part of a federal lawsuit being filed by the family of Joshua McLemore against Jackson County, its sheriff, and others. And we'll warn you now, the videos given to us by his attorneys are incredibly disturbing. We will only show them to you once. And the reason we're doing so is because it's important to understand the context and the backdrop to this story. You're going to see here McLemore as he's being put into his cell in July of 2021 after allegedly pulling on a nurse's hair. There are no windows, no toilet. He is completely naked. The lawsuit says he spent nearly every second of the next 3 weeks inside this continuously lit cell. You see a time lapse here as garbage starts to pile up in his room. The lawsuit alleges McLemore was in a state of psychosis, that he was malnourished, dehydrated. They say he didn't sleep. McLemore left the jail on this day, August 8th, down 45 pounds in 3 weeks. According to the lawsuit, he died 2 days later. We talked about McLemore and his death, but let's tell you what we know about him as he lived. He's from Gulfport, went to Mississippi State, raised by a single mom in the Navy. He liked to read and play chess and play video games. He had a history of drug abuse and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Aaron Gilchrist is joining us now, and it is important to note that McLemore, he had neither been tried nor convicted, Aaron. He was being held in this cell, according to this lawsuit, during that time period. What happened? How did this happen, and what do his family and his representatives want here?
So we should tell you that the official autopsy says that McLemore died from multiple organ failure that was caused by not eating and not drinking, which was a byproduct of the untreated schizophrenia he suffered from. The federal lawsuit says that jail officials for 20 straight days failed to provide adequate treatment for McLemore, that he showed obvious signs of mental illness while he sat there naked, barely eating, as we said, in a state of psychosis, in solitary 24/7. The court filing includes several images, and we'll warn you again that they may be hard to look at here. As you see them, you can see Macklemore at his normal weight the day he was brought in compared to 20 days later when the suit says he looked emaciated. The complaint says that jailers showed deliberate indifference toward Macklemore's well-being. I spoke to the lawyer, one of the lawyers who filed this lawsuit, and he says that Macklemore's death was avoidable.
When you watch that video, it's obvious to anybody who watches that he was seriously ill, he couldn't take care of himself, and he needed urgent help. And for guard after guard, day after day, to see that happening and not know what to do, that's not just an accident.
And so while, Hallie, they are requesting damages in this lawsuit, they also want there to be a lot of change. They want to make sure that the sheriff's office changes policies and procedures and does a lot more training, the lawyers say, of the staff there at the jail.
So the next question, I think, obvious question would be, well, what is Jackson County saying? We understand the prosecutor there did a separate investigation for Jackson County and said there's no crime to be charged. Explain that.
Right. The Indiana State Police did a 9-month-long investigation here that the county prosecutor reviewed, and the goal there was to figure out whether the death was the result of a criminal homicide in this case. The prosecutor said there was no evidence that Macklemore's death was the result of knowing or intentional actions taken by any other person, or his death was caused by a knowing or intentional or reckless act there. And at the end of the analysis, though, one of the things that stood out to me was the Jackson County prosecutor noting that there are questions about reasonable care that are matters of civil law, not criminal law, and that Macklemore most likely died because of prolonged lack of attention by the jail staff as a group. We did reach out to the county today to get a response to this lawsuit. They haven't responded back to our request for information yet.
Certainly something I know you will stay on top of. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much for bringing us that story. Appreciate it. When we come back, a new investigation into dozens of police officers in California and why hundreds of criminal cases could get thrown out because of it. We're going to tell you what's going on coming up. A new investigative report is revealing a ton of racist and homophobic text messages from police officers in a Northern California city. And now that could lead to the overturning of hundreds of convictions. We're talking about Antioch, a city of about 115,000 people, something like an hour north of San Francisco. You can see one text here from the district attorney's report from an officer, John Ramirez, to 22 of his colleagues, so kind of a group chat on June 8th in 2020, saying he'll buy somebody a prime rib to, quote, 40 that blank during a George Floyd protest. Investigators say he's referring to using a 40-millimeter grenade launcher on the city's mayor, Lamar Thorpe, who is black. None of the officers have responded to NBC News requests for comments. Neither did the mayor or the officer's attorney. Dana Griffin is following the story from L.A. A lot of these texts have disturbing stuff in them. I want to just say that at the outset here, that it is disturbing. Yeah. But explain the scope of this investigation, because the consequences here could be huge. We're talking about the possibility that hundreds of convictions could end up getting overturned because of this, you know, kind of awful group chat. Dana, explain that.
Exactly. Yeah. So an attorney for one of the suspects arrested by the officer said that these messages could undermine the credibility of these convictions, hundreds, if not more. And here's why. I want to start with some of the messages. This one, the language comes from Officer Amiri in April 2022. He texts a Brentwood police officer, quote, "Since we don't have video, I sometimes just say people gave me a full confession when they did it. Gets filed easier." In May 2020, Officer Ramirez asked the group of officers in this same chat group, "See all the riots in L.A.? Officer Rombug responds, "No, I didn't." Officer Ramirez responds, "For the gorilla that died." That was in reference to George Floyd. This is another example that comes from the 2014 assault by an Antioch police officer of an unnamed person who may have suffered from mental health issues and later died. Sergeant Wise Carver texts, "But we kill more Mexicans than anyone else, so blacks can feel safe." And in this last case, Hallie, when officers were observing a group of black suspects eating, Rumbog text, "I bet it's chicken." Adams replied, "Could be ribs." Rumbog replied, "For sure, watermelon and Kool-Aid." So obviously just very egregious stereotypes, racial slurs, homophobic language used here. And also you've got one officer admitting that he lied about reports and claimed that he got this false confession. So no wonder these officers could be prosecuted not only for assault, but for falsifying reports, Hallie.
The city's mayor, we mentioned him earlier, Lamar Thorpe, is condemning these texts, asking a question, and I'm quoting here, how the hell did all this alleged misconduct go on for so long without anyone in our command staff noticing? How do we answer that question? How do they answer that question?
You know, I think part of why this went unchecked is because you have some high-ranking officials in that text group, including the president of the Antioch Police Association, Sergeant Rick Hoffman, who allegedly described in this report a suspect with the homophobic slur. And, you know, we spoke to an attorney, or at least our NBC Bay Area team spoke to an attorney who represents one of the 4 murder suspects that was involved in this takedown with police when some of those messages were referring to the Kool-Aid, the chicken, the ribs. Here's what she had to say about all of this.
Clearly, none of them belong in law enforcement. None of them should have that kind of power over another human being.
So an officer, an attorney representing those officers has asked the public to stay neutral and to wait until more context comes out. But you've had city leaders like the mayor condemning this, saying that these officers should not be employed here. Now, it's unclear whether any of the officers named in this report are on leave or what will happen next to them. We know that this is now under review. The FBI is not commenting. The officials are not commenting. But usually when something is under review, they will take all this evidence and then make some sort of decision. And again, when you think about the fact that this officer was referencing falsifying reports, they could face prosecution and also the assault. And some of the other things that they were talking about in this chat, you know, we're told that these sort of chat groups are very common in law enforcement, but they were referring to people as gorillas and even a large black woman as a water buffalo. And so, again, to what that attorney was referencing to, for these officers to have that sort of thinking, this is why you have a lot of people calling for law enforcement reform, because of these same ideals that people believe law enforcement officers should not have. Hallie?
Dana Griffin, thank you very much for that reporting. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, a lobsterman in Maine with a catch you will not believe this week. State police say they got a call to investigate that. It is a 5-foot-long military rocket that the lobsterman pulled off like 20 miles offshore. They said they weren't able to figure out if it had any explosive material inside. Hope not, by the way, it was in his truck. A bomb squad detonated it to be safe. From our Midwest Bureau, Minneapolis will be the first big city to allow broadcasts of the Muslim call to prayer at all hours. The city council agreed to change the city's noise ordinance so that it could be heard over speakers 5 times a day year-round. Before this change, sounds connected to religious worship were only allowed between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., which typically would not include early morning prayers and sometimes night prayers. The mayor is expected to sign the resolution Monday. Out of our Western Bureau, it may sound like the start of a joke. A moose walks into a hospital in Alaska. It's probably looking for some food. It reportedly munched on some of those office plants there before a security team, bless their hearts, guided this thing back outside using a love seat and a chair. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. So, a new report may shock you, or it may not shock you, depending on your relationship, maybe, and your own perspective. It shows more women are earning as much or more as their male partners, but still doing most of the work at home. This new study looks at the past 5 decades, showing in opposite-sex marriages, more women are the breadwinners, and more women are earning about the same amount of money in so-called egalitarian marriages. Egalitarian is an interesting word when you look at this next stat. In those marriages, women are spending more than twice as much time than their husbands on housework and way less time on their paid work. Kristen Dahlgren is joining us now, and it is such an interesting report, interesting findings, Kristen, because I think there is so much discussion right now around, and there has been for like the last few years since the pandemic, the mental and emotional labor that specifically women in heterosexual opposite-sex relationships take on inside the home, right? And the disparities there. That is the sort of context to this other study that shows that only 7% of Americans value a man's work at home more than what he does at the office. It is embedded, it seems, societally and culturally.
Right. And I don't think anyone's really surprised that things haven't changed with perceptions as quickly as they have in reality. The reality is that in the majority of marriages, they still adhere to these sort of traditional gender roles. You talked a little bit about this statistic, but I want to drill down a little bit more on it. In those equal marriages where women and men make the same, women spend 2 more hours than the man caregiving and 2.5 more hours on housework and things around the home every week. So even when the woman is the sole breadwinner, men do spend more time with caregiving, but it's still equal when it comes to work around the house. So, it is just eye-opening, those statistics about where things actually stand as women make more and more.
Can we be real? Oh, go ahead, Kristen. I'm sorry. No, you go.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so I think we're asking, like, what is the solution? And experts say it's going to take a while. It's going to be very difficult. There has to be a change in how society looks at things. But the one thing that I thought was interesting, the advice they gave seemed quite simple, and that is communication within a relationship and talking to your partner about who is going to do what, how that breakdown is made, and that is how you change things.
I love that you talk about that from a solution-oriented perspective, because in some ways it feels kind of like a bummer to see these numbers. I'm just going to lay it out there, right? Because, and again, obviously understanding my own perspective, coming as obviously a woman in the society, but you see more and more women as CEOs, more and more women getting into there are plenty of women doing plenty of amazing things, and yet there is still this kind of outlook or perception, not even in public attitudes, but in what happens behind closed doors inside the home. That's something that we don't really know until surveys like this come out. And you have to wonder what the trend lines are, if there is going to be a solve on this, if it is going to be communication, a change in societal attitudes, a rethinking of some of the traditional gender normative roles that people have right now. That's going to take a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, even if you take the work piece out of it, I've been thinking about this, as I was preparing for this segment, take the work piece out. There's a lot to do when you're raising a family and around the house. So that communication part, has to be a part of any of it, or you have one person doing a lot more than the other. So then you add in work, and, you mentioned sort of women doing more. 26% of seats in Congress now with women, 10% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. So we're starting to see more of that. And I do think that the rest of it will follow, but, it is going to take a long, long time, Hallie.
Kristen Dahlgren, thank you so much for that breakdown. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the show, astronomers say they've got the clearest picture yet of a black hole thanks to AI, but some experts are not convinced it's totally accurate. I'll tell you why. We are seeing tonight a brand new stunner of a picture of a super huge black hole up in space. This is it. Scientists say it's about 54 million light years away in a gigantic galaxy called Messier 87. So take a look at this. Researchers are using AI. And I know it might not seem like all that clear, but that's the best thing we've got of a black hole. It's wild to look at, a little bit. It makes you have some feelings, I think. This new picture could help figure things out, like what black holes are made of, or maybe even help us find other planets far away. But there is a catch. Some experts say that AI might not be totally trustworthy here. It comes as the European Space Agency is launching a new mission to explore Jupiter with that thing, the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, nicknamed JUICE. That is JUICE blasting off today. It's going to take 8 years for it to get to Jupiter, which is, of course, the biggest planet in our solar system. Dr. Savik Ford, professor of astronomy at the City University of New York, joins us now. So, Dr. Ford, it's an interesting picture of a black hole. The first picture of a black hole we saw in 2019, it was kind of blurry. Well, now it's like AI is sharpening it up. How big of a deal is that, and how much should we believe what the AI is telling us we're supposed to be seeing?
So this is a really fabulous, actually, advance. I'm very excited about it. And to give you an analogy of how much better this new image is, the size of that ring is about the size of your credit card if it was sitting on the moon. And so the old picture, was good enough that you could tell if it was like a Visa or a MasterCard, but the new image is sharp enough that you could actually read the digits off of the front of it. So,
I am obsessed with you for that analogy, because I'm looking at it, I'm like, I guess it's cool. It's like an Orby-looking eyeball thing. I'm not a space person, so I'm like, I don't know. But that is bananas to think about being able to, like the analogy you just gave, being able to read the numbers off a credit card on the moon. That's like some real intense stuff.
It's totally cool, and I like that analogy too, because it's the reason that we can use AI to do this sharpening is because we think that we understand what's really there. And so you can't just like get something for free. If you're trying to read somebody's credit card numbers, you know that they're numbers and there's only 10 digits, right? And so you kind of have a guess as to what you could be looking at. And so that's the technique that the scientists who produce this new image are using. And that's why we have some confidence that this is real, because we think that we understand the physics that goes into stuff falling into black holes. What we're actually seeing is the gas that is falling into the black hole. So that's the orange stuff. And then the dark shadow of the black hole itself is the hole in the middle. And so, you know, if we understand the physics right, then we've given our AI a training set that is smart, and so it's selecting from that training set what is reasonable. It's sort of like selecting the numbers off of the card.
Dr. Suffolk-Ford, it is fascinating. I appreciate you being on to break it down with us. Thank you very much. That does it for this hour. More coverage picks up right now. Coming on the air with breaking news from the Supreme Court, hitting pause for now on a ruling that would have blocked how people can get access to a key abortion pill. It means right now that pill is still as available as it ever was, but there's a big question mark around the next steps. We'll explain. Then we'll take you to Boston with the suspected leaker of tons of classified documents showing up in court for the first time. So how did he get all that stuff? And why did it take the FBI weeks to track him down? Plus, new texts from court documents laying out the chain of events that led to the stabbing death of the guy who founded Cash App. What they're telling us about this apparently personal attack and the connection to his suspected killer. Also breaking in just the last hour, Montana is on the verge of becoming the first state to ban new TikTok downloads, meaning you're not going to be able to get it off the App Store. It's going to the governor's desk now, but how are they really going to be able to enforce it? And a new report shows women are earning as much or more than their male partners. So why isn't that leading to more equality at work at home? We're going to explain later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we're starting with that breaking news out of the Supreme Court, with the justices now officially considering what to do next in the fight over a key abortion pill. And in just the last 45 minutes or so, something like 250 Democrats on Capitol Hill are filing a new brief to the court saying, hey, keep access to this pill available. Here's the deal. We're seeing the court essentially press pause on this ruling out of Texas that would have made it harder to get the pill, would have banned it from being sent through the mail starting tomorrow. But tonight, Justice Samuel Alito is out with this new order. This is it. You see it here. That says the lower court's ruling is on hold until midnight Wednesday. That's going to give the justices more time to figure out where this whole thing goes, meaning, at least for now, women can still get this abortion pill by mail as the legal fight unfolds. We're going to have more on that with our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, in just a moment. But we want to get to some other news that is breaking just in the last little bit here. We will see the suspected leaker of hundreds of classified military documents back in court Wednesday, with a ton of pressure right now on the Biden administration and the intel community to figure out how a 21-year-old IT specialist stationed near Cape Cod got access to these sensitive military secrets. I want to show you the court sketch that our team got of 21-year-old Jack Teixeira in court today. You should see it here in a second. That's it. That's the moment when he learned, or at least around the moment when he learned he's going to face a couple of federal charges related to having these classified documents. After the dramatic arrest we showed you 24 hours ago, where Teixeira was basically perp-walked in those red basketball shorts. That's him standing up right there, olive green T-shirt. That's in Massachusetts. And at the federal courthouse today, look at this. This is his family. They're walking out, linking arms. They didn't answer any questions. Our team inside the courtroom says they saw one of the men and his family crying when they locked eyes while Teixeira was in handcuffs. Today's court appearance, however, is not helping us answer some of those big questions, right? Like, how did he get this access? No clear answer from the Pentagon on why this member of the Air National Guard in Massachusetts would need to know about the movements of Ukrainian troops, right? Or like how the spies or our spies are looking at the Kremlin. Second, why did he do it? Was it really just clout for his friends on Discord? Can't say for sure because we haven't heard from Teixeira on that. And third, with these documents online for weeks, for months, how did it take the FBI so long to identify him? Because based on court documents, sounds like they only figured it out for sure inside the last 24 hours. Ron Allen is in Massachusetts now, joining us live from Boston. And Ron, this arrest happened about 90 minutes after the New York Times made the ID. And if you see here, these journalists tracked this guy by like the granite countertop in a kitchen by matching up the pattern of that countertop with the pattern of the screen grab, et cetera. Walk us through how the FBI found him and whether we're getting any answers to some of these big questions.
As in all things online, there's a trail, and the FBI has been trying to follow it, as was the New York Times and a lot of other journalists. It seems from the affidavit, the arrest affidavit, that the FBI was able to locate another gamer, another person in this private chat group that Teixeira was involved with. And that individual was able to provide the FBI with some information that led them to the suspect. At one point, the two had been involved in some video communications, so he knew what he looked like, which helped them identify him once they got a name and all that. It appears that this was happening as far back as December of last year. And you're right, the FBI only figured out who this guy was in the last 24, 48 hours or so, and that's when they arrested him. Again, it's remarkable that a 21-year-old who was, I believe, like 2 years out of high school when he enlisted in the military would have access to this kind of information. But there are some analysts out there saying that there are over 1 million people who have this top secret security clearance or more. And so there's a lot of analysis being done of whether that should be the case, how this could happen. And again, the investigation continues. So it's unclear if more people will be implicated in this. But there's nothing in the arrest documents that suggests that he was working for a foreign government or that he was trying to blow the whistle on something, as is the case in other high-profile leak cases. It appears that he was trying to impress this group of young gamers that this whole affair, that these documents, that everything was going to remain in this little group of 20 or 30 people, but somehow it got out. And why and how and why he was doing it in the first place is really unclear. Hallie?
Ron Allen, live for us in Massachusetts. Ron, thank you very much. We'll take you back now to that developing news as it relates to the Supreme Court and the abortion fight that is happening. Our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, is with us now. Okay, Laura, break it down, right? What does this mean pragmatically, and what happens next?
Okay, so pragmatically, all that is this done is essentially maintain the status quo. Women can still get access to this regularly used abortion pill called mifepristone. The Supreme Court just hours ago granting that emergency request from the Justice Department and the pill manufacturer that has essentially asked the court to please put that order from Texas on hold from last week. That order in Texas, so controversial because it had essentially tried to roll back a number of ways that the FDA had tried to make it easier to get this drug. So just like sort of basic things like getting it through the mail, being able to take it longer in your pregnancy, not having to go in person to a doctor's office. All of those things that the FDA had done to try to make it easier are things that the judge in Texas had blocked. And so now all this means is that the plaintiffs who brought the case, this group of anti-abortion advocates and other doctors, they'll now have their say. So they're going to have to submit briefs to the Supreme Court on Tuesday. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, this order in Texas will remain on hold to just maintain the status quo. That's what they had asked for. It's called an administrative stay. All it does is just maintain the status quo.
Okay, so then what is everybody's looking to do? What will happen then? Basically, let me just put it in super plain English, as you just did, right? Everything is paused on hold till Wednesday at midnight. What are the options for the Supreme Court? At least. So what are the options then? One option would be, right, they extend that pause. Are there any other options for them?
Yeah, exactly. So they could decide to extend the pause and grab the case for themselves, in which case then you would hear oral argument. The case would be fully briefed in front of the Supreme Court, probably on an expedited basis, perhaps. Or they could decide to keep everything paused, maintain the status quo as it relates to this this drug, but essentially kick the case back to the Fifth Circuit. So go through more of the normal appeals process, right? And that's what the Justice Department had asked for. In part, if they weren't inclined to do what they did today, they said at least, justices, please maintain the status quo so that the full case can be heard on appeal in the Fifth Circuit. And then if the Fifth Circuit rules against the Biden administration, they can take it back to the Supreme Court. So this may bounce around a while in the courts. The key is just to know. Yes.
I'm sorry, Laura, those two, to be clear, those two options mean no practical change to access to mifepristone, right?
Exactly. The key is whether it actually stays paused. As long as the judge's order in Texas stays paused, then you will have access to mifepristone just as you do today.
Could the Supreme Court do anything on Wednesday that would change the game and unpause things and change access to mifepristone?
Yes, they could deny the Justice Department's request as it relates to, again, the loosening of restrictions, so meaning that you would not be able to get it by mail.
Laura, Jared, great breakdown. Thank you. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Just in the last hour, more bad weather in Fort Lauderdale, throwing a wrench into one of South Florida's biggest events in the spring, and maybe complicating the recovery efforts from all the flooding we've seen this week. We're talking about the Tortuga Music Festival being told to evacuate. This is the notice that came up. This is a kind of a big deal event down in South Florida. There's another storm system moving in. Any bad weather, I don't have to tell you, that is not going to help that area recover any faster after feet, not inches, but feet of water came down. A lot of it is still in the streets. You see it here. Whole neighborhoods flooded. People on boats, people on kayaks trying to do anything to stay above that water. It's not like Florida's a stranger to bad weather, especially in hurricane season, but it's not hurricane season. And state officials say they didn't expect something like this to happen mid-April.
This is a disaster akin to a hurricane strike. And there's still parts of the city that are still flooded and neighbors are still hurting. We're doing our best to make sure that those neighbors are taken care of today and tomorrow.
NBC's Sam Brock is joining us now live from Fort Lauderdale. And Sam, you are traveling, I understand, with the Fort Lauderdale Fire Department as they are going around checking things out. What are they seeing? What are you seeing?
Hi, Hallie. Yeah, we have a unique opportunity right now to go on a high water vehicle with the Fort Lauderdale Fire Department as they're literally going home by home, finding out who's outside, if they're struggling, do they need any assistance. So far, there have been more than 1,000 rescues and assists from just this unit since the event started. So you're talking really about 2.5 days or so, not even 3. And you'll see as we go through this neighborhood, they will be reaching out directly to folks and finding out, especially older residents here, how they're doing. I'm still amazed, quite frankly, Hallie, as we drive through here, the amount of water, the sheer level of it. I mean, it's probably hard to tell from your vantage point.
Oh, yeah, it's all the way up to the bottom.
How much this is?
Yeah.
It's easily 4 or 5 feet. We've been in other neighborhoods where it was 2 or 3 today, but this is the most so far. We're going to pass a stop sign in a second, and you're going to see that it's a good ways up that stop sign. And what I would say is, this is a lower elevation than other parts of Fort Lauderdale.
Got it.
But the issue is area-wide, that it's built largely at sea level to begin with. We might be below sea level where I am right now. So that's just one of the problems they're experiencing. I know we've talked about this as well, that during high tide, which it just was about an hour ago, it's much harder to get the water out because the pumps that this is all connected to spit out the water in the ocean, but those pumps are covered by the ocean when it doesn't recede for low tide. So they're dealing with officials here with so many different factors that are complicating their efforts as they try to help people. I will say I got a chance this morning to talk to someone who visited from Ireland with his wife and his young son, 2 years old. That son, Seamus, was in his car seat. They got stuck on Wednesday night. It became very apparent to the husband they were not going to be able to get out. He had to try to coax his son to get him out of the window as strangers nearby tried to help them out of harm's way. Here's how he described it to me. Your window was closing fast, and you had to make a decision.
I had to make a decision there and then because I could see the current was coming in the water and the car was starting to move.
So your son, Seamus, was being distracted with Peppa Pig while you were lifting him out of a car window.
Yeah, I had to tell him that. I had to tell him that we're going swimming. He loves swimming.
It's all about keeping a smooth tone, Hallie. And again, we're just going through yet another street here where you'll see some people walking. They feel comfortable doing it. There are others who are in their 70s or 80s or 90s, and it's 4 feet of water, and they want nothing to do with that. I asked what the most common scenarios are for the rescues and assists, and they said generally people literally on top of their cars because they can't escape, or it's older people that need to be reunited with their families, so they have to physically be picked up and driven to another location so they can all be together, and sons and daughters can get them food and medicine and make sure that they're okay. But you just think about Florida in general has an older population. So
I do think
what they're
about
doing,
that,
the work
yeah.
from the Fort Lauderdale Fire Department right now, so critical to helping put families at ease at a time where there's a lot of tension.
Well, I think about, you know, my folks live in Florida, and I think about, God, if that was their neighborhood, I'd want somebody showing up saying, hey, this looks pretty hairy. Like, let's help you out on this one. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I didn't even know that your parents are in Florida. That's great. I want to stop by the Jackson family at some point to say hello. But yes,
they don't want to see you, Sam. No offense, but if you're showing up, that means things are not in good shape. So we're gonna let you there.
Yeah,
Our
I'm
thanks
kind of like
to you.
Jim Cantori of NBC News.
I appreciate you, and listen, we appreciate the Fort Lauderdale Fire Department too, giving us a look at just that really important recovery effort and what they're doing. Thank you, sir. Well, some new details tonight out of San Francisco on the murder of that tech executive, with court documents seeming to show that Bob Lee was stabbed to death after an argument about his suspected killer's sister. Listen, this is really important, folks, because this helps us understand, or at least gives us a clue, as to how Lee may have known Nima Momeni. That's been one of the big questions here. Momeni, of course, the suspected attacker. Here's the chain of events these documents laid out. They're based on what a witness tells police, basically. This witness says they saw Lee, the Cash App founder, having a conversation with the sister of Nima Momeni. The witness said that Lee then had to reassure Momeni that nothing inappropriate happened. We don't know anything more than what is said in these court documents here. According to these court documents, Momeni's sister sent a text to Lee after the argument saying, just wanted to make sure you're doing okay because I know Nima came way down hard on you. The documents say Momeni then drove Lee to what they describe as a remote location and stabbed him multiple times with a 4-inch knife. At least one of those stabbings punctured Lee's heart. Momeni is supposed to be arraigned in the next couple of weeks. Prosecutors want him held with no bail until then. Nyala Charles is joining us now. New details, not just from these court documents, but the district attorney. Nyala, tell us about it.
Right. The district attorney says the stabbing was caught on a surveillance camera. This is what she said in an interview with Nightly News. Take a listen.
They are seen exiting that tower on surveillance video and leaving together in Mr. Momeni's car. And it is after that, shortly after that, that we see that vehicle stop in a secluded location. And ultimately, we believe that's where the stabbing takes place. And so it's for that reason that we believe he obviously presents a significant public safety risk.
And Hallie, surveillance video obtained by DailyMail.com shows the moments after Lee was stabbed, after the moment that the DA describes. In it, it appears that Lee attempts to try to flag down a car for help, but the car continues to go on, and then he's seen outside of a condominium complex. So now Momeni is charged with murder with a knife enhancement and faces 26 years to life in prison if convicted here, Hallie. And until then, until that arraignment in a couple of weeks, he'll be held without bail.
It seems like, Nyala, from looking through these documents, and our team here on NBC News Now did that, right, that the question around Nima Momeni's sister is an important one here. Who she is, the connection that she has to obviously both of these men. We know one is her brother, this suspected killer. The other, of course, Bob Lee, the victim here, the former Cash App founder. What else do we know about her?
Well, she was actually in court today before the arraignment was pushed, and that's the same sister that was mentioned in these court documents. So based on the witness that is mentioned here, that witness says that Bob Lee knew the sister for at least 3 to 4 years. And although it gives us pieces of some interactions with them, it doesn't give us a complete timeline. But we know in one of those interactions, the text message that you say that she sent, she actually calls Bob Lee, calls him selfish pricks. The complete statement there is, I love you, selfish prick, so possibly a nickname there. And the court documents also say that she's married and point to possible marriage issues that she was having. Hallie?
Nyala Charles, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I want to get you to some developing news now out of Montana, where lawmakers are passing a new bill in just the last hour that would block new downloads of TikTok. This is the most aggressive step yet by any state against the very, very popular app that is owned, of course, by ByteDance. That's its parents' company, with links to the Chinese government. To be clear here, it's not like you have to delete TikTok when you cross into Montana. So if you're flying to Bozeman, like, you're fine. But if it is not on your phone already, Montana wants to stop app stores from letting you download it. The state's Republican governor is expected to sign it. It would go into effect in 2024. In a statement to NBC News, a TikTok spokesperson says they will continue to fight for the app's users and creators in Montana, saying that their livelihoods and First Amendment rights are threatened by this egregious government overreach. That is the statement from TikTok. But this move from Montana potentially lays out some framework on what we could see on a bigger scale. Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Let me go micro-macro here, Sahil, and let me start with Montana. How would they enforce this? Like, in other words, if I am in Ohio and I want to download TikTok, I can, but then I get on a plane and cross into Billings and I can't anymore, how would that, like, pragmatically, realistically go into effect?
It's unclear, Hallie. There are big questions already, including from many of the critics of this bill as to how this piece of legislation could actually be enforced. They do seem to say that if you already have it on your phone by the time it takes effect, which is early next year, early in 2024, then it doesn't really apply to you. That could be a whole lot of people. Do they just get to keep it? What about people from out of state? You know, you alluded to this. If you already have TikTok on your phone, or let's say you just leave Montana and download it and come back, is that okay under the rules of this bill? And what about those who use a VPN, who appear technically to be in a different location than they are? These things are legal. These devices can be legal. And if they do that and download TikTok through the use of a VPN, does that violate the particular bill in Montana if it were to become law? So there are a lot of questions here, maybe even more questions than answers for Montana. But it's notable, this is the first of a kind bill happening in a state. It happens as the federal government has been dragging its feet. Lawmakers in Congress have been talking about doing this for a while. They have not taken any action. And here you see a desire at the state level, in this case, a red state, taking matters into their own hands and banning TikTok, or at least
you've gotten into the macro piece, which is, does this lay out a framework perhaps for other states to follow? Do you think that folks on Capitol Hill, where you are, who have been making moves to crack down on TikTok, could draw any inspiration from this?
Maybe. I mean, it would certainly be different. You know, the federal government has enforcement tools that a state like Montana simply doesn't. They have diplomatic tools to deal with foreign countries that Montana doesn't. So any ban that, you know, could potentially pass through Congress would look different than what's happening in Montana. I think there may be some lessons in terms of, you know, what happens in the legal battle. It looks pretty clear that this is going to be challenged in court, what judges and what the courts say. Maybe it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court about free speech protections, First Amendment protections. That would be relevant to Congress as well. But, you know, on Capitol Hill, there are a number of different approaches here that have been suggested by those who want to ban TikTok. And it's not clear what, if any, has consensus to pass right now. There are those who want a narrow bill that simply bans TikTok, or at least aims to ban TikTok and doesn't do much else. There are others who say they need to deal more broadly with the issue of foreign tech, foreign apps, and there are others who say you can't just go at TikTok and foreign control. There has to be a broader privacy piece of legislation. So unclear what, if anything, Congress is going to do. Now we might see more and more states try to copy this, Hallie.
Sahil Kapoor, thank you much. Appreciate it. Overseas, big questions tonight about what could happen overnight in France. More protests, more demonstrations maybe, after the country's top court says today it is, in fact, constitutional, they say, for the president to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. That is controversial. That is why we have seen people already tonight protesting outside City Hall in Paris. That sign, you see, climate of anger, I'm told it says. That's exactly what we've seen there for months, with what's kind of been a nationwide standoff over this retirement proposal. President Emmanuel Macron pushed it through without a vote in Parliament last month, his prime minister, saying today there was no winner in today's court decision. Ali Arouzi is following the story from Paris for us. Both sides, Ali, really dug in here. Questions about what we might see in the days to come. But I've noted what you've described as almost a kind of fatigue that might seem to be setting in here. Macron is getting what he wants. It is not surprising that this top court in France ruled in his favor. Unions still want their people to demonstrate. Where does this go next?
Well, that's the burning question, Hallie. Is the momentum going to completely deflate, or will they pick up again? Look, Macron got his way. It hasn't done his approval ratings much good. 19 percentage points down from last year. But this was his legacy move, and he got it. And he's not going to back down from this at all. What was kind of surprising, though, Hallie, was that, as you mentioned, we were also outside City Hall. There was about 1,000 people gathered there. They'd sprayed signs on city walls saying, saying, the path to democracy is dead. But as soon as that ruling came through, they kind of fizzled out and went home. There wasn't that kind of commotion in Paris at all today. The Paris police say that they've made about 100 arrests and there were pockets of violence, but that was always going to be expected because there are a hard group of people and anarchists that are determined to make trouble. But the vast majority of people that were against these reforms left. In the north of France, it was significantly more violent. In the town of Rennes, several police stations were set on fire. A former monastery was set on fire. But this is very, very much less than what we've been seeing in March. Now, the unions here, they're the big people that are against this move, and they are asking for teachers, workers, young people to come out on Labor Day on May 1st to show a full show of force against this bill. But it's law now. This bill is now law. It's been passed by the top constitutional committee. There are no appeals to be made with this. So people, by and large, are going to have to accept this because Macron isn't going to back down. And if they don't accept it, it just affects the quality of their everyday life. They're out on the streets protesting, getting tired. They're not making money. They're not putting food on the table. And at some point, they're probably just going to have to accept defeat. The one thing that's still left on this, Hallie, is that a motion was tabled for a referendum. Now, that committee is going to consider it and give their decision on that on the 3rd of May, but it's highly unlikely there'll be a referendum.
Hallie Arouzi, we are going to see. Thank you for being there for us. It is after midnight now, I know, in Paris. Appreciate it. Listen, the Justice Department is getting aggressive with Mexican cartels today, charging dozens of top members, including the 4 sons of notorious drug lord El Chapo. They're known as the Chapitos, alleged to now be leading their dad's group. You see them there. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, describing some absolutely depraved things, examples of why the DOJ wants to see the Chapitos captured and punished.
They often torture and kill their victims. They have fed some of their victims, dead and alive, to tigers belonging to the Chapitos.
The move comes as the Biden administration is also announcing a big deal with the Mexicans to stop drugs from coming up over the southern border and to stop guns made in America from going down to Mexico. You know why this is such a big problem. Statistics like this one, right? Charts like this one. Synthetic opioids like fentanyl playing a role in the deaths of 80,000 Americans in 2021. NBC's Julia Ainsley joins us now. We just heard him say people were being fed dead and alive to tigers. I mean, this is horrific stuff here. It is an example of why they want to be cracking down so much on these people. But 3 of these 4 are still out there.
Yeah, that's right. And so it actually is going to take a lot of international cooperation, not only to go after these people, but also, as we've seen, sometimes you cut off the head of the snake and others crop up. And fentanyl and the draw of fentanyl in the United States, as more and more people get addicted, that money feeds those violent activities and that campaign of terror that the Sinaloa cartel and now this new one that's emerging that they're propagating in Mexico. But another piece and another country comes into this too, Hallie, and that is that China is often sending the raw materials to Mexico. Then they get manufactured there and they go to the U.S. Now, the U.S. announced some sanctions against China over that. Mexico sent a letter saying, stop sending us that. It's a matter of how close is that cooperation? Probably not very, to really make an impact on that part of the supply chain.
All of it, though, Julia, goes back to this idea of what kind of teeth, figuratively, does the U.S. government have to actually get something done here? Whether it's sending that message to China and Mexico, whether it's actually getting these so-called chapitos, the 3 of them that the U.S. wants. They can name them, but that's a lot different than seeing them in handcuffs.
Yeah, now, it's funny. We've actually made quite a bit of a deal of a progress in our relationship with Mexico on this issue just in the last month. Right. A month ago, the president of Mexico said fentanyl is an American problem and basically threw up his hands. So
he said people needed more hugs. I mean, that was part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, at least we've come this far, but I think it's really going to be a matter of how much will Mexico devote their law enforcement manpower to going after fentanyl when, as you can see, there's so many other violent things that they're trying to take care of in their country right now. But you can see they're tied together.
Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for that reporting.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Coming up here on the show, a split screen at the NRA convention. Former President Donald Trump and his former VP, Mike Pence, will take you there live as we're getting new word on somebody who's not going to run in 2024. The answer may surprise you. Plus, new this hour, how Bud Light's parent company is responding to all that backlash with its partnership with a trans influencer. That's coming up later this hour. Stay with us. Former President Donald Trump in just the last hour in Indianapolis. He is, of course, officially a presidential candidate for 2024 and making that very clear at the NRA convention in that city, getting a pretty warm reception from the crowd, unlike, for example, the reception, at least in large part, that his former vice president, Mike Pence, also rumored to be considering a 2024 run, got. He was booed. Listen.
Well, hello, NRA. I love you, too.
To be fair, some boos and an I love you, as you heard. Remember, Mr. Pence is set to testify against his former boss in a special counsel investigation looking into the former president's push to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. Keep in mind the timing of the convention here. It's happening just days after mass shootings in Louisville and Nashville. And even with some of the controversy that group has faced, its convention still seems to be a must-attend for folks looking to get in the White House in 2024. Not just Mr. Trump, Mike Pence, but Asa Hutchinson, Governor Kristi Noem, Governor Chris Sununu, all rumored to be considering runs. They're set to speak. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott sending video messages. Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. And Vaughn, we were with you live about 45 minutes ago, or 60 minutes ago now, when former President Trump was on stage. I have heard that he has since sort of talked about the polling, et cetera, on this stage, making this sort of a campaign speech in some ways, as this question loomed over whether he and Mike Pence would physically cross paths, given not just the way that their relationship has deteriorated since the January 6th insurrection, but also the fact that Mike Pence could be a competitor for the 2024 election against his former boss.
Right. And Hallie, I'm told that the two men, despite both being here in Indianapolis within an hour of each other, did not see each other. And it's notable because this is the first event that both Donald Trump and Mike Pence have been at together since they left Washington, D.C. more than 2 years ago. And, of course, that's where you see the dueling speeches. Now, you saw the reception that Donald Trump got versus Mike Pence, and this being his own home state here. But it's one in which Donald Trump even referenced, came on second after Mike Pence, and even referenced, he goes, I heard about the rough reception that he got, referring to Mike Pence. So this is an individual who also then showed polling up on the big screen here. I mean, this is somebody that revels in his success over individuals, even his former vice president.
Can I just ask you real quick, Vaughn? You were in the room. Were the boos, they were boos for real? And I asked that because I could already hear people. I can already hear people close to Mike Pence saying people are overstating it. It wasn't that bad. I'm sure that's what they would say.
It's a splash of booze, and I think it would be easier to dismiss if it wasn't to reality for Mike Pence everywhere he's gone over the last 2 years. You can go to most Republican events, whether it be county, local events with activists, or you just ask random Republicans on the street, and there's a discontent with Mike Pence, and that plays out. He has, his favorability rating is among the lowest of any Republican potential 2024 candidate. So Mike Pence is not naive to the fact that this is a problem for him yet. It's clearly perhaps not going to keep him out of this presidential race.
Right. Yeah. His advisors do still see a lane that they think they can take advantage of here. There is an interesting other piece of the puzzle that's come out in just the last couple of minutes as we talk about what this field could look like. Remember, there are only a few confirmed candidates in the race. There's a whole slew of them considering it, except tonight for Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, against somebody who used to be, like Mike Pence, in the Donald Trump administrative orbit. He is saying he's not going to run for personal reasons. And this is really interesting to me, Vaughn, because Pompeo is somebody I've been watching since 2021 who's been given vibes like, hey, he was going to jump in.
He was just in Ukraine 2 weeks ago. Mike Pompeo has made his ambitions clearer throughout this time in the administration. He remained close with President Trump all the way through the end of the administration there. And Mike Pompeo is somebody who was very careful in his separation in distinguishing his view of the political future versus that of Donald Trump's. And when you look at this Republican crowd, this field here, the question that was at play was it going to be too fragmented? Excuse me, sort of the non-Trump vote here. You already have Nikki Haley in the race. You have Tim Scott in the race. You have Nikki Haley. You have Asa Hutchinson in the race here. And polling has reflected that Donald Trump has a base of support. And the question is, if too many other Republicans got into the race, would it allow Donald Trump to walk to the nomination again?
Super interesting. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much. Appreciate you being there for us. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the family of the man who killed 5 people at a Kentucky bank this week is having his brain tested for CTE. That's that degenerative brain disease caused by perhaps concussions or blows to the head. A family friend says this shooter got concussions while playing sports in high school. Number 2, the mom of a 6-year-old who shot and hurt his teacher in Virginia. She was in court today facing charges of child neglect and failing to secure a handgun. Her attorney says she wants to get to a plea deal with prosecutors, a plea agreement, and said his client was depressed in the year before the shooting. Her trial is supposed to start in August. Number 3, an elite San Diego high school basketball star who's set to go to Memphis next season has been arrested, according to reporting by ESPN, charged with assault with a deadly weapon. We're talking about 18-year-old Mikey Williams. He's got millions of followers on Instagram, which, by the way, has been deactivated. Number 4, Twitter has a new feature for its blue subscribers. It's going to let them tweet up to 10,000 characters, which is essay length. There are magazines shorter, so prepare yourselves. The free version, if you have it, you're stuck with just 280 characters. Number 5, President Biden wrapping up a tour of Ireland today with a speech in the location where his great-great-great-grandfather grew up, and it was like a rock star reception. Look at that. People waving American flags. There were signs up in town. They lined the motorcade route. Earlier, a very emotional moment for the president as he went to Knox Shrine and met with the priest who gave last rites to his son, Beau Biden. The president's heading home later tonight. Coming up here on the show, why Ukraine is banning its national sports teams from competing in some of the events at the Olympics. That's coming up later in the Global. Stay with us. Video newly obtained by NBC News is showing us some just horrific images from the final 3 weeks of a man's life, spent in a windowless isolation cell in an Indiana jail. It's part of a federal lawsuit being filed by the family of Joshua McLemore against Jackson County, its sheriff, and others. We're going to warn you now, the videos given to us by his attorneys are incredibly disturbing. We are only going to show them to you once, but we're doing so because they are important to understand for this story. I want to show you now. You see here McLemore as he's being put into his cell in July of 2021 after allegedly pulling on a nurse's hair. There are no windows. There's no toilet. He is completely naked. The lawsuit says he spent nearly every second of the next 3 weeks in this cell, which was continuously lit. You see a time lapse here as garbage starts to pile up in his room. The lawsuit alleges McLemore was in a state of psychosis, that he was malnourished, dehydrated. They say he didn't sleep. McLemore left the jail on this day here, August 8th, down 45 pounds in 3 weeks, according to the lawsuit. He died 2 days later. So that, McLemore and his death, those details from his attorneys. But let's tell you what we know about him as he lived. He's from Gulfport and went to Mississippi State, raised by a single mom in the Navy. He loved to read and play chess and play video games and had a history of drug abuse and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And it is important to note that McLemore, he had neither been tried nor convicted, Aaron. He was being held in this cell, according to this lawsuit, during that time period. What happened? How did this happen? And what do his family and his representatives want here?
So we should tell you that the official autopsy says that McLemore died from multiple organ failure that was caused by not eating and not drinking, which was a byproduct of the untreated schizophrenia he suffered from. The federal lawsuit says that jail officials for 20 straight days failed to provide adequate treatment for McLemore, that he showed obvious signs of mental illness while he sat there naked, barely eating, as we said, in a state of psychosis, in solitary, 24/7. The court filing includes several images, and we'll warn you again that they may be hard to look at here. As you see them, you can see McLemore at his normal weight the day he was brought in, compared to 20 days later when the suit says he looked emaciated. The complaint says that jailers showed deliberate indifference toward McLemore's well-being. I spoke to the lawyer, one of the lawyers who filed this lawsuit, and he says that McLemore's death was avoidable.
When you watch that video, it's obvious to anybody who watches that he was seriously ill, he couldn't take care of himself, and he needed urgent help. And for guard after guard, day after day, to see that happening and not know what to do, that's not just an accident.
And so while, Hallie, they are requesting damages in this lawsuit, they also want there to be a lot of change. They want to make sure that the sheriff's office changes policies and procedures and does a lot more training, the lawyers say, of the staff there at the jail.
So the next question, I think, obvious question would be, well, what is Jackson County saying? We understand the prosecutor there did a separate investigation for Jackson County and said there's no crime to be charged. Explain that.
Right. The Indiana State Police did a 9-month-long investigation here that the county prosecutor reviewed, and the goal there was to figure out whether the death was the result of a criminal homicide in this case. The prosecutor said there was no evidence that Macklemore's death was the result of knowing or intentional actions taken by any other person, or his death was caused by a knowing or intentional or reckless act there. And at the end of the analysis, though, one of the things that stood out to me was the Jackson County prosecutor noting that there are questions about reasonable care that are matters of civil law, not criminal law, and that Macklemore most likely died because of prolonged lack of attention by the jail staff as a group. We did reach out to the county today to get a response to this lawsuit. They haven't responded back to our request for information yet.
Certainly something I know you will stay on top of. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much for bringing us that story. Coming up, how racist and homophobic text messages sent by police officers could lead to hundreds of overturned convictions in California. Plus, an extreme athlete in Spain emerging from darkness after spending something like 500 days underground in a cave. Why she says she didn't want to come out. That's later in the local. A new investigative report reveals a lot of racist and homophobic text messages from police officers in a Northern California city. And now there's concern that could lead to the overturning of hundreds of convictions. We're talking about Antioch, a city of about 115,000 people, about an hour north of San Francisco. You see one text here from the DA's report from an officer, John Ramirez, to 22 of his colleagues back in 2020, saying he'll buy someone a prime rib to, quote, 40 that blank during a George Floyd protest. Investigators say he's referring to using a 40-millimeter grenade launcher on the city's mayor, Lamar Thorpe, who is black. None of the officers have responded to NBC News' request for comment. Neither did the mayor's nor the officer's attorney. Dana Griffin is following this story from Los Angeles. There's a lot in these text messages here, Dana. We want to warn people that they are upsetting. Talk through the scope of the investigation and the concern for the potentially huge implications here if convictions do end up getting overturned.
Yeah, Hallie, I mean, just going through the pages and pages of text messages, it is really egregious and just kind of baffling to know that these are officers that are using this language. One of the attorneys representing a suspect that was caught up or that was arrested by a group of these officers says that this could undermine hundreds, if not more cases. And here's why. Take a look at the language in this first text message that we have from Officer Morteza Amiri. This was back in April 2022. He texts a Brentwood police officer, quote, "Since we don't have video, I sometimes just say people gave me a full confession when they didn't. Gets filed easier." Also in May 2020, Officer Ramirez asked the group of officers in this chat group, "See all of the riots in LA, question mark?" Officer Eric Rumbaugh responds, "No, I didn't, LOL." Officer Amiri responds, "For the gorilla that died." That was in reference to the murder of George Floyd. Here's another example from a 2014 assault by Antioch police of an unnamed person who may have suffered from mental health issues and later died. Officer Inabnet responds, "But we kill more Mexicans than anything else, so blacks can feel safe." And just one last example, Hallie. This comes from when officers were observing a group of black suspects who were eating. Officer Rumbach texts, "I bet it's chicken." Officer Adams replies, "Could be ribs." Rumbach then replies, "For sure, watermelon and Kool-Aid." Now, as you mentioned, our NBC affiliate in the Bay Area reached out to all of these officers, and we have not heard back yet. But it'll be interesting to see what the department does to kind of reprimand these officers who likely will be out of a job and could possibly be prosecuted, not only for assault, but for falsifying records, Hallie.
The city's mayor, who we referenced, Lamar Thorpe, who is, of course, condemning these text messages, is asking, how the hell did all this alleged misconduct, I'm quoting here, how the hell did this go on for so long without anyone in our command staff noticing? Has there been an answer to that?
there hasn't been an answer yet. We are still waiting to learn what is happening behind the scenes. A lot of the city officials are not commenting. They're only saying that this case is now under review. But to kind of answer that question, why this went on for so long, there are some high-ranking officers in that text chat, including the president of the Antioch Police Association, Sergeant Rick Hoffman. Now, an attorney representing these officers says that they're asking the public to remain neutral until more of the context of these text messages come out. But I mean, a lot of people have their own opinion about that, and one attorney representing some of the suspects say that these officers should not have a job, and it's just absolutely egregious. Hallie.
Dana Griffin, thank you very much. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a new segment we call The Global. In China, the Brazilian president is meeting with the Chinese president in Beijing today, part of a push to boost ties between the countries. Lula was greeted with full military honors, including a 21-gun salute. Keep in mind, China is Brazil's biggest export market, buying billions of dollars worth of things like soybeans, sugarcane, and oil. From Ukraine, national sports teams will be banned from competing in international events that also have athletes from Russia or Belarus. So this means, yes, the Olympics, the Paralympics could and will be affected. It's not clear if this ban would apply when people from those countries are competing as neutral, but certainly something to watch ahead of the games. In Spain, speaking of athletes, a real extreme athlete emerged from under a cave today after spending, how long do you think she spent in there? 500 days, totally isolated from the outside world as kind of this experiment on the human body. What did she do for 500 days? Her support team says she exercised, she painted, she drew, she knitted, she read something like 60 books. Scientists were trying to figure out more as they monitored her about the human mind and circadian rhythms. She celebrated 2 birthdays down there by herself. She doesn't really know what's gone on with the world since November of 2021. When reporters asked her if she ever thought about leaving early, she said she didn't even want to come out. What a story. Speaking of stories, this next one may shock you or it may not, depending on your perspective and maybe your own relationship. That's because a new study shows more women are earning as much or more as their male partners, but they're still doing most of the work at home. The new study looks at the past 5 decades, showing in opposite-sex marriages, more women are the breadwinners, and more women are earning about the same amount of money in so-called egalitarian marriages. And egalitarian is an interesting word when you look at this next stat. In those kinds of marriages, women are spending more than twice as much time as their husbands on housework and much less time on their paid work. Kristen Dahlgren joins me now. Can I just channel like some realness here, Kristen? Because we've been talking about, I think, societally and, you know, women and men and partnerships about this issue of emotional and mental labor and household work and the disparities, as obviously a lot of women work outside the home for a very long time. Why are things seeming to move so slowly, as this new study is sort of showing and pointing out? I don't expect you to really be able to answer that. Right. I realize that's like not a fair question, but do you know what I mean? Like, riff for me here.
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, look, this is how our patriarchal society has run for a very long time. Yeah. And so, you know, when you're talking about women in the workplace, it's maybe over the last 50 years or so that things have begun to change. And look, it may take a long time for society to sort of catch up. So we're starting to see that financial equity more, but in many relationships, there are still these traditional gender roles. And, you know, if we delve into it deeper, it may be some of where women are either wired differently or trained differently. Look, I went and did some housework in between when I talked to you last hour and now, because I don't like to see things, you know, sitting around that need to be done. And so it's just sort of in my DNA to do that. No complaints about my marriage there. But, you know, there are just these things that we're battling with as a society. Even when women are the sole breadwinner, this study shows that men do more caregiving, but around the house, it is still split equally. So experts say, you know, this is going to take some time to change society, But they did have advice in changing your own relationship that communication could be key in sort of deciding who does what and how much time is spent on it.
That stat is rather startling, right? Or I don't know if I want to characterize. I think it's actually startling. I think is fine. 7%. I want to get this right. 7% of Americans value a man's work at home more than what he contributes at the office, and that also says a lot about where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, I saw another stat that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if we have the graphic. I think it was the second one for this, was that what were people's perceptions? So what 48%, so almost half of people thought that men wanted to make more than their female partners. And so that was just what society's perception was. And it came out that 25% said, oh, they probably don't care. So when you look at that, that is probably changing over the past few decades, when the perception was that all men wanted to be the breadwinner and make more than their spouses. So we are seeing little changes in this, but it's certainly not happening as quickly as more equity in the workplace, maybe.
Kristen Dahlgren, thank you for joining me for that conversation. I appreciate it. Still to come, Anheuser-Busch's CEO, the parent company of Bud Light, finally responding just in the last little bit here to all that backlash over Bud Light's partnership with a trans influencer. And he's saying, hey, they just want to bring people together for a beer. We're getting into it next. Tonight, the head of Anheuser-Busch is out with a response to some of the backlash that we've covered here on the show on Bud Light's partnership with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney. You have the CEO, Brendan Whitworth, saying that they never, I'm quoting here, they never intended to be a part of a discussion that divides people. We are in the business of bringing people together over a beer. We told you about all of the drama on this about a week ago. This has been going on for days, ever since the company sponsored a post on Mulvaney's Instagram during March Madness. There were some people who did not like that. They started posting videos online, calling for boycotts, dumping out their Bud Light, destroying cans, etc. PR and crisis management expert Molly McPherson, who's been writing about this, is with us now. And now you have this response finally, right, from the head of Anheuser-Busch on something that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about, whether you're somebody who's calling for boycotts or whether you're somebody who thinks that the boycotts are, you know, uncalled for here.
Yes, and when you say we finally have a message, it's not a surprise that it landed on a late Friday afternoon.
Friday, that's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe, you know, this message, when you read the tone and the language used in this message, it's written like it's almost an ad or you're at a Bruce Springsteen concert. You hear all the language about honor and history, values, military, hardworking. It's written in a way that appears to be very non-polarizing, but it seems like it's almost coded to speak to the conservative right, to let people know that we didn't want to cause a ruckus. We didn't want to make a big deal about this. What we care about are all of our customers, but it seemed like they were speaking to one customer in particular.
So do you see it then, Molly, as a capitulation to those calling for a boycott? Do you think it says something about perhaps business pressure that Bud Light ended up being under or not?
No, I think it was more strategic. Like, no one has written the playbook yet about how to execute a perfectly strategic campaign when it involves representation, social issues, or any type of, you know, group where it might cause some type of a ruckus online. It's always like a campaign to campaign as we go. But they knew that it was going to cause a lot of discussion. You know, they sent out the product to influencers. Influencers are on social media. People create content and commentary around social media. So it's no surprise with Dylan Mulvaney, who created a lot of pushback when she did a campaign with Ulta. And that is, you know, a makeup company. So clearly they knew that there would be some type of pushback with Bud Light. But what they came away with was millions of, you know, earned impressions in the media. So a lot of people were talking about it. So it was far from an unsuccessful campaign.
Molly McPherson, thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it. That's a wrap for this hour. Thank you, as always, for being with us. We'll have more for you here on Monday, including some exclusive reporting on people who really want to go green in their jobs, not for their money, but for the environment. Part of a big week of climate coverage leading up to Earth Day. We'll see you right here back on Monday. Have a great weekend. Top Story starts right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.